The Great Dorset Steam Show is perhaps the largest of its type in Europe. It's staged on 500 acres of farmland at Terrant Hinton in Dorset. The 1990 show features many exhibits, all the way from steam through to the internal combustion engine with cars, tractors and motorcycles. We're going to go round during the duration of this video and see some of the machines and the characters who lovingly look after and restore them. This is Michael Oliver, the man behind the show for the past 22 years. Quite a sizable site, this, Michael.
Yes, I think we're now the largest showground in England. We're moving up now to be nearly 700 acres.
700 acres, that's some size. And how many engines would you say you've got on site here today and this week?
I think we've got about 150 steam engines. We've got 3,000 entries here all told of different sorts. And I think we've got 1,000 internal combustion engines that drive something or another.
This must all take quite some organising.
Well, it doesn't really, because my motto is sort of fling it all together and let it sort itself out. I usually sort of set sections to where it's got to go. I then put a certain number of people over there and say, now look, you got to get into there, there's the front line, and that's that.
Over the past 22 years or so, obviously you must have had some problems along the way. What would you say is the worst thing you've had to cope with?
Well, I think one of the worst problems is when we get the crowds in here. Fortunately, it's a good problem because the crowds cause it. From a steam engine angle, is getting the coal and water to them. Sometimes the crowds are so dense here in the avenues that it takes us 20 minutes to half an hour to furnish an engine with coal and water.
I do understand, actually, talking to one or two of the chaps around here, you've got some ambition of going over a full week in the near future.
Yes, I do feel that such an enormous amount of effort goes into rigging it up. It used to be for 3 days, then 4 and 5. That once it's all in position, I think I'll have visions of doing 2 weekends and following through the week. Because now we're at the stage where all we've got to do is collect the people's money to come and see it.
Fabulous stuff. I'm going to put you on the spot now, actually, Michael. Out of all the exhibits around here, what's your particular favourite section?
Well, I would personally, I do own a steam engine, but my ambition would be, I shall never be able to afford it, would be to own a set of steam-driven roundabouts. I would love that.
Yes, I must admit they're quite a spectacle, those, Michael.
Yes, they are. I think they give an old English fairground the flavour that I remember as a boy with my father and mother on a bank holiday. You sort of go to the fair, forget your overdrafts, forget everything you got, although you've got to face it again on Tuesday. But I think you can come up here, and this is the only show that I know of, no matter what your worries are, you cannot help but forgetting them.
We start our journey around the 1990 Great Dorset Steam Fair with perhaps the most spectacular and awesome display of steam power to be seen on any rally field. This is Jim Sarney, the foreman, you might say, I suppose, of the heavy haulage section.
That's right, yes. As Mr. Oliver calls it, section leader. What a terrible job. Anyway, yes, that's right. What we're hoping to do, or what we try and demonstrate to the general public, is the hauling capabilities of these big road locomotives, because we feel that when they see them just stood about doing nothing, they don't really know the difference between one and another. So if you look round the show today or any time, you'll see that a lot of the engines are doing what they were built to do. They may be on a thrashing drum or a saw bench or driving a fairground ride, or the rollers are obviously making the roads, and we obviously are trying to demonstrate what these big heavy haulage engines did for a living. And the type of work they were asked to do was to haul these very heavy trailers, as you've already seen on the film. The trailer in use today, the big one, weighs 30 tons empty. That's without any load on. And then we've got, at the moment, we've got 50 tons of Portland granite loaded onto the trailer. The load then, what's about 70 tons we got on there. So on a field and not on a road, that wants a lot of pulling. So it takes 3 engines to pull and 1 to push at the back.
What kind of tractive effort would all these 4 engines be producing on that load then?
Well, if they were out on the road, even in this field, 1 engine will actually move the load on its own. But when it comes to a hill, they're producing, each of the engines are capable of pulling about 50 to 60 tons each, even 100 at a push on a level surface. So I suppose they've got the equivalent of shifting around about 150 tons actual pull on them on a grass field or a field like this, because the rolling resistance on these fields is very high. The trailers have got small wheels and they don't run over the grain very easily, so you're pulling the equivalent of about 150 ton out on the road. So each engine, you know, is, well, it's difficult to say what the horsepower load is of them, but each engine is contributing, you know, about 40 or 50 ton pull on the load, you know. And of course you've got to remember that you've got the engine weight as well. So the gross train load is somewhere of around about 120 to 130 ton gross train load. So going up this particular hill, you're pulling 130 tons up a 1 in 8 hill. That's what you're actually producing with them.
Is there any particular reason for actually having one of the engines at the rear and just 3 at the front?
Yes, the engine at the back, it assists going up the hill, but its main purpose is a brake engine, what they call a brake engine. and its main function is coming down the hill more than going up, because what it does, it holds the load back at the rear so that the front engines are not taking all the weight down the hill. Now the idea of this is to stop them jackknifing, because when they're going down the hill, the trailer is trying to push them, and the front engines are trying to hold it back, and they're only on a straight bar. And there's been incidences in the past when they were working for a living for the back engines to push the front one out of the way, because the front one's trying to hold it, but the back ones are pushing, and the load is all weighing on it. And if they can't hold it, it just pushes it out of the way, known as jackknifing. So the back engine's purpose is to hold the load back and take a lot of the weight off of the leading engines. Their main purpose is to pull it up the hills. The one at the back's main purpose is to hold it back.
When you're actually travelling up the hill, is there any danger of the whole thing slipping back down? And have you got any way of breaking it and stopping it if it does try to do that?
There's very little chance of them actually sliding backwards down the hill. If they stall on the hill because they're in too high a gear, or the conditions are bad, or the wheels start slipping, they won't run back, they just stop and the wheels start skidding. The trailer's provided with brakes anyway. We've got chocks, big wooden blocks to put under the wheels, and we have to block it all up, change it into a lower speed. The skill is getting it all started again, because every engine has to open the regulator all simultaneously so they all start pulling together. Otherwise one starts slipping and the other can't move it, and then nothing happens. So it's quite a lot of skill in getting the loads moving again. There's quite a lot of skill in actually moving the whole thing. We feel that we've had probably as much experience as anybody in the country moving these heavy loads around at the shows, and there's only certain of the lads who are allowed to go on the loads who have had the experience of moving the loads. You know, it's a pretty skilled operation. It's pretty spectacular as well, as have you seen. So it's given everyone an idea of what the poor old heavy haulage engine had to do.
Of course, before the loads can be hauled around, they actually have to be placed onto trailers like this one. Putting timbers onto this trailer isn't as easy as you might imagine. For example, the craning engine isn't used to do it. Here's Charlie to run us through the way it was done in the southeast of the country many years ago.
Using the engine's winch wire. What you do, you put the actual winch wire around the tree back to the pole carriage and up over the pole carriage. Then as you wind it in, it winds the tree in and it rolls it up onto the pole carriage.
It sounds rather complicated, that, is it?
It is very complex. It's a simple idea that's complicated in practice. It takes a lot of skill to get the tree to land right on the pole carriage.
So in the days when this was a trade, the chap who had to do it would have to serve quite an extensive apprenticeship then?
You would start as a boy at probably 14 and you'd run around with the shackles for the men, and by the time you were about 25 you might be leader of your own gang.
Are there that many people about these days that know the trade then?
Not very many now. Most of the old hands who did it for a living have now passed on, unfortunately, but there are one or two.
Charlie's father-in-law just so happens to be the owner of one of the engines in the haulage section. It's called Pandora, and I asked Charlie if he could tell us one or two of the details about the engine.
Well, she was built by Wallace and Stevens in 1912 and sold in 1913. She's a 6 nominal horsepower expansion engine, which means that she's designed to make the most economical use of the smallest amount of steam.
Were these engines very, very successful then? Were they efficient at the job?
Yes, they were. When they were new, they were one of the most efficient engines that you could buy. The problem being that they're very complicated and they tend to wear, which makes more and more slack in the valve gear as you go on, and they become less and less economical.
So the expansion system that was fitted by Wallace and Stevens to a number of their engines, whilst being said to be an excellent concept, proved to suffer from the ravages of time, and as time went by, wear made the unit more and more inefficient. The engine Pandora that we see here, however, is quite a rarity in the world of preservation, because there are only 7 Wallace and Stevens engines featuring the expansion gear that have survived to this day. In addition to demonstrations, the heavy haulage road locomotives are put to great practical use around the showground. Here was a plough that required removing from a trailer. This was done with the assistance of the Fowler crane-mounted locomotive, the Duke of York. And so the weight of the implement proves absolutely no obstacle whatsoever to the power of the Duke of York. And with the task achieved, Paul Scully moves the engine away and we move on to our next port of call. The task of ploughing and cultivating has been carried out on the farm now for literally centuries. And over the years the job's been done by horsepower, steam power and latterly diesel power. First of all, I had a word with Reg Beebe of Beebe Brothers from Loughborough, and I asked him how he came to convert a number of steam ploughing locomotives to diesel power.
After the last war, some of these the steamers, they get in the obsolete stage, so due to tractors coming into force, and otherwise the boilers were getting very weak. This one in particular was converted to diesel due to bad condition of firebox. Now at that time it was rather difficult to find diesel engines to use on these conversions, but as it happened, the local Ministry of Supply depot at Ruddington, they got one or two of these captured German army lorries there, and we purchased those and made 3 into 2 and eventually got 2 engines suitable for mounting on the conversions as shown here. Also during the conversion process it required a special gearbox which was made by Fowlers of Leeds. Well, that's not correct. It was made for Fowlers of Leeds by Bostock and Bramley of Stalybridge. We got hold of 2 of these boxes from Stalybridge and they were used in the conversion. After conversion they were used for, I would say, 7 or 8 years on dredging and a bit of ploughing, a bit of cultivating, mole ploughing and that sort of work. Then they became somewhat redundant like the original steam. Occasionally, possibly every 2 years or so, they might get an odd job of dredging, and other than that they became obsolete altogether until the, shall we say, preservation cycle became prominent. These were the last of the first of the, as far as we're concerned, of the preserved conversions to have been taken over into the preservation field. And Mr. Gibbon seems to be making a jolly good job of it. They're travelling around all over the country and I think it caused quite a good amount of interest. Now at this stage we'd better pass you over to my ploughman Chris and let him have a word or two on the ploughing subject.
Hello there, Chris. I understand you're the chap that's actually, I wouldn't know whether to put it as a word as drives the plough, is that correct?
More steer than drive. You know, you have to steer it going down the field because you can get it in a furrow, but you've got to keep hold of it, to hold the steering to make it go sort of as straight as possible as you can. But with the plough, she's a very old plough, and there's a lot of worn parts on it. And she tends to sort of wander a little bit, but we're managing to keep it in a pretty straight line here at the moment.
I should imagine it's quite a skilled task. How long does it take to learn the job?
All your life, I should have think. I've been doing it for sort of 3 years now, and I'm still sort of learning really. Reg's Michael Beebe was the first one who sort of got me on the plough 3 years ago down here when he came down to see Basil when he first had the engines. And he sort of gave me a few hints what to do, because how I came to join up with Basil, I went up to the sale up at Beebe's when Basil bought them, because I used to live up there when I was a child, and I met Basil up there and sort of spoke to him. Then we went to Headington Steam Engine Rally up near where I live, and Basil turned up with the engine and we got sort of talking to him. Then we met him down here at Dorset, and he was sort of here on his own, him and his wife, with 2 engines, a small plough, and no helpers. So he asked me sort of come on, get on, and I'd sort of never been on a plough or nothing before, and we sort of got going from there really. But I think, it takes years and years to sort of get experience to hold it, do it the job properly. But I don't think I'm doing a too bad a job really, are we, Reg?
We're doing all right. We're doing all
right, I think.
That was your introduction then to, shall we say, running up and down the field on one of these. Are there many hazards involved in the ploughing job?
Yeah, you have to watch yourself. You have to, especially at shows. It's not too bad when you're just doing it out in the field when there's nobody about. But when there's a lot of people about, you have to be careful of people walking on the cables, getting too close to the cables. And also, when you're sat on there, you have to watch the steering, because if she catches on something in the ground, the steering mechanism pulls like that and it can shoot right back, and it can smack you in the face if you're not careful. You have to sort of concentrate on there and keep well hold of the wheel. That's why, if you notice, when we plough, we always plough with the steering led over, you're over on the right hand side of the steering a bit, because if the steering does shoot back, it misses you, you don't get clouted.
Is there much danger of the steel rope breaking at all?
They will break. I've not known one myself. Right, I've never seen one go before, but I've heard of several, going, and when they do go, they will fly off. It's not too bad on the plough if I'm sat on the plough, because the cable, when if she would snap, she will go towards the engine that's pulling you. So, I'm sort of all right there.
So the man on the engine's the chap who runs the risk of anything happening like that?
Yeah, if we're up close to him, yeah. But if we're in the middle of a long pull, it's not too bad because the rope would just fly off. But if there's a lot of people about, you do have to be very careful with it. It can be a bit hazardous.
We've just witnessed the diesel ploughing. We're here with Graham Atkinson, and he's on one of the steam ploughs. But this isn't actually ploughing that we're doing here, is it, Graham?
No, this is what we call cultivating. This is rough chewing up of the ground, not actually turning it over, just breaking it up.
And is that preparing it for the plough then, or?
No, this was an option to ploughing. This was just breaking the ground up if you didn't want to plough it. When you'd cultivate it with one of these machines, and then you'd fine tilt it then for sowing. This was, just another way of doing it, sort of thing.
Now we've got two engines here on the field. Are these engines both actually a match pair?
No, they're not. They're two different engines. This one is one of a pair from Leicestershire, and the other engine, I don't believe the gentleman's got the other one as the pair, but that's from Manchester area. So, they're not a pair as such. They're both from the same manufacturer, Fowler, and they're a left-hand and a right-hand engine, and they're both BB1 engines, but they're not a match pair.
Now, when you're actually working up here on the engine, what kind of things are you watching out for?
Well, I've got to be watching the other engine all the time, because what we do, we work by signals of the steam whistle. And if he signals me 2 whistles, that's for me to pull. If he signals 1 whistle, that's to stop. So I've got to constantly keep my eye on him when he's pulling the engine back. And if anything goes wrong from this end, I can see anything wrong with the cultivator from this end, I give him 1 whistle and he stops pulling. And the same way when we're coming back. And he gives me 2 whistles to tell me that the cultivator's ready to pull back towards me. And that's how we work, you see, on the whistles.
This is Charles Coffin here, actually working with heavy horses. What are we doing with these horses, Charles?
Ploughing in a ploughing match.
You're actually taking part in a match then?
Yes, that's it. Yes.
And you've had to go through heats to get this far this week, have you?
No. Just straight in.
Straight in?
Yeah.
Do you think you stand much chance of winning this competition?
I might.
You're hopeful, shall we say?
Well, yes, hopeful then. Yes.
Now, what weight are the horses that are actually pulling the plough that we've got here?
Roughly about 1,800 weight.
That's each, is it?
Yes.
So they're quite some size. And how much training do they take to do the job?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. And how old do they have to be to start doing the job?
Well, you could start at about 2 years old. 2 to 3.
Now, obviously, I mean, I've looked at the plough going up and down the field here, and it's not the horses that are doing all the work either, is it? I mean, you've got to put a bit of hard work in with the plough at this end, haven't you?
Yes, it's got to be set up. And to be able to go along, nice.
And what exactly do you have to do at this end?
Just turn it. Just turn the horses, and then the plough will go round more or less on its own.
And you keep it straight as you're going up the field, then, do you?
If possible.
And no doubt that's not that easy, really, because you've got the horses in front of you and you can't really see what's going on in front, can you?
No. The only difficulty is here is a lot of stones, and that puts you out. If you was on sand, soil, you just go along and not. Once you start straight, you more or less keep it straight.
So the stones will actually knock the plough off centre?
That's right, yeah.
The diesel tractor was used on many jobs in its working life, so here at the Great Dorset Steam Fair you can find many strange examples and configurations, just like this particular one that was used for cutting hedges.
In the world of tractors, Lance Bulldog is not actually a name that I'm quite familiar with. We've got Tony Baker here. Could you tell us one or two things about this tractor, Tony?
Lance Bulldog was made in Germany, Mannheim. They originated the single-cylinder hot bulb semi-diesel engine. Was very popular in Europe and in this country and really worldwide.
You said there semi-diesel engine. What does this term mean?
Well, diesel engine means to most people a high compression engine which is injected at the top of the stroke by hot air, a true diesel engine, which Dr. Diesel was a German as well. But this is a low compression engine and is fired by heating the hot bulb to start with, and then being low compression, when the mixture gets to the top, the hot bulb is a surface ignition, i.e. it will run forwards and backwards, and one has to be awfully careful that it's not running backwards when you engage forward gear, because it startles you and the chap behind you.
Are there any safety features to make sure you don't do that, or do you just have to keep your eye on it?
Yes, there is a safety feature. There's only one instrument on this tractor, and that is a engine direction indicator. And it's situated just above the gear lever, and you're meant to check that every time you engage gear to make sure that the engine is running in the right direction.
Does the tractor have any other unusual points to it then?
Well, for 1937, this is a 1937 model, a 45 horsepower. In that time, it was reckoned to be a very powerful tractor. It had a power takeoff, which was rare for tractors before the Second World War. It had a high-low ratio, which gave it virtually 6 speeds. In the days when in this country we really only had things like the Fordson Standard, which were much more primitive in the form of transmission. It was quite fast on the road, and in fact in Germany and in Europe they used it for carrying heavy trailers to feed mills and to market and that sort of thing, where in this country we were using lorries. In Europe they were using tractors to pull 2 trailers.
So this Lance Bulldog really was quite a technologically advanced machine then?
very much so. It's very economical, and another attribute is that when hot, it will run on most fuels. And the saying goes, the old saying goes from the old timers, that when it's hot, as long as you can pour it in the tank, it'll go. And in the war, I've had people come up to me and say that they used to run on waste engine oil mixed with creosote and paraffin. I mean, in those days, I don't know what the environmentalists have said about the ozone layer, but I mean, it smoked a bit, but it ran.
We have here Ken Allway along with his tractor. Ken, a lot of manufacturers made three-wheeler tractors like this. What was the purpose of a three-wheeler tractor?
Well, it's for row crop use, so they could go between the crops without the wheels turning when they turn on the corners, without chewing up the crop. And these wheels were adjustable so that they can go to what width the crop were in those days. Like the machines were set to set certain width for the crops, where today they make the tractors and don't plant actually in the tractor wheels today.
Did the design pose any balance difficulties to the tractor?
Not really, only when perhaps on short turning too quickly you would have a balance problem, but normal safe driving, there aren't any problems, because most of the row crop stuff were on flat ground, and if you use them on soiling ground, was when they perhaps were a little bit unstable.
And what makes this particular machine?
It's a Minneapolis Moline, a ZUT, 1941.
So it's not British then?
No, they were shipped over from America in kit form. I don't know where this one was assembled, but there was a place at Reading that assembled them for the MM Tractor Company, and they were sent over on the early ones were on a lease buy arrangement for the government and the farmers.
How did they match up with British models then? Were they better or what?
Well, the British didn't make a lot of tractors in those days. That's why we went during the war and after the war. They were shorter tractors. So this is where the state sent over these tractors, because we only had the standard forgings that were starting to be built then in those days.
Now I understand that you've just obtained this machine, is that so?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And is it going to pose a lot of work for you to get it really up to pristine condition?
No, I mean, as you can see, the tin work is all pretty good. I did have a problem mechanically to get it going because it had been stood for a while, but once I cleaned the tanks and cleaned up the ignition system, or the magneto circuit, and got the tanks cleaned out and carburetor, we started it. It wasn't seized up or anything, but the chap that had it before me, I mean, he did keep turning it over to stop it from seizing. It was kept in the shed then.
Which I suppose, no doubt, you're quite thankful for.
I'm very grateful for you, because, I mean, to have parts manufactured would be quite costly, but it is possible, like, you know, to get parts made and make them yourself.
Here's a tractor that's not had to travel far to the show this week. Pete Dyer's brought it along. It's an International Harvester, one of the early models made by the American company. Pete, can you tell us how old actually this tractor is?
Yes, it was built in 35. Nearest I can get to it, I wrote to Chicago and they said that it was built in that area, but they weren't quite sure of the colour, the change in the colours. Some was grey, some was red. But I kept it as it was because we already got it restored by then, you know. But I was fortunate to have it, but I did find it in an old derelict brambles and sheds. Been there quite a number of years, but quite happy that we paid £100 for it and restored it to its glory.
Are there any unusual features that International's built into this tractor then?
Yes, there's no for the water pump. There's no water pump at all. The water just circulates on its own graduated. You know, it's the temperature. It's apart from that, it's, you know, it's virtually the same as any other tractor.
It's not that large compared with some other tractors, so what kind of job was it actually built for?
Well, they say that they was used on golf courses, but this one was used on the fields during the war years, you know, because it was wanted badly. But I think they done virtually everything there was to do, you know. It was a question of what sort of work was it capable of doing, you know.
It was a jack of all trades tractor then, and if there was a job needed doing, this one would muck in.
That's right. You can go fencing today and harrowing tomorrow, you know, and you're away with it.
One of the big attractions of the Great Dorset Steam Fair is that you can see trades being carried on that were practiced in the past. Here we take a look at the art of timber sawing. Well, we've got Beano Hill here, foreman sawer on this saw bed. What really are the techniques of sawing, Beano?
Well, you've got to know what you're doing and understand a bit about the machine and the timber. What you do on one log is suicide on the next, perhaps.
It does actually look a bit crude, but obviously it's not. It's quite technical and more precise than it would at first seem. Somebody no doubt would have to take an apprenticeship out to do this in the old days.
It takes a long time, as I say, different kinds of wood and if the saw must be sharp.
What kind of maintenance is needed on the saw then? How frequently do you have to sharpen the saw up?
Well, we sharpen it when it gets dull, you see. You can soon tell. Like to finish off with this one, the saw was tending to push the log back. Well, he shouldn't push back, really.
So what it's more or less doing as it gets blunt, it's ripping through the wood as opposed to cutting it
out instead of sawing it.
And you get a rougher finish to your surface then, do you?
As you can see, that's a pretty good finish for a rough tooth saw, what we've done now.
What precautions do you have to take in this job then?
What, when we're sawing, you mean? I like to keep the bench clear of bits and pieces because the vibration's got a tendency to go towards the saw, and if you get a chip, a biggish chip, go down between the saw and the frame, get the saw hot in no time. And of course the saw then will go like a saucer. You're not going to do any sawing when it gets hot. They expand, you see.
Of course, there would be no sawing going on if it wasn't for the engine up the other end. Lou Lewis here is in control of the engine. Lou, what do you have to watch out for up there?
Well, mainly Beano. Watch for his signals. As long as I've got plenty of steam, you know, we're okay. Bit of water, bit of fire, bit of water, bit of fire.
It's just a question of more or less letting the brake off on that flywheel then?
More or less, yeah. It's just keeping a good head of steam and watching for the governor on the saw bench.
We don't have no shouting sort of thing. We do it in signs. You know, when I want to start, just nod me head. And when we want to stop, just hold up your hand, you know, as if you're a policeman.
The belt on this assembly, how's it actually kept in place?
Well, if you have a good look at the engine, you'll see that the actual flywheel is crowned. It's sort of barrel-shaped, more or less. I don't know about the saw bench. Is a saw bench fully crowned?
If anything, on the pulley. You've got to know your job to line the engine, you know, properly. Yesterday we had a engine and couldn't get lined up properly, but this came in first time. He's done it before for years, must have.
So what he's trying to say is you've more or less got to get your engine square onto the pulley wheel on the saw bed.
You've got to watch the flywheel and the pulley on the saw bench, and you know, line them up dead true. But if they are a bit out of true, you know, the crowning will keep them will keep the belt on, because the belt always goes to the highest point.
The art of thrashing on the farm is centuries old, and we've now got Bert Dibben to tell us one or two things about the process.
Well, the main thing is the straw for the thatching, and that's why it is done in this way. The straw is cut with a binder, cut rather earlier than the combining, and then it's thrashed with a special machine which doesn't damage the straw, and it goes for thatching the local houses.
So what is the process to do? What do we do with the straw when it goes in?
It's fed in the machine and it's thrashed out with a rotary flail, and that doesn't damage the straw. And then it's tied up in bundles at the front, ready for the thatcher.
So you're actually left then with the product of straw and the corn in the pile over there?
That's right, yes, yeah. and the grain goes into the trailer at the back.
Is everything from the process usable then?
Yes, everything. Everything, yes.
In what kinds of ways?
Well, the grain, some varieties go for bread making, others for animal feeding. And the straw for thatching, the waste straw as we call it, goes for litter for animals. The chaff have been used for horses to mix with the oats, but not so much nowadays.
Now I understand you actually use this machine on the farm.
That's right, yes, yes. Pretty well from one harvest to another.
And how old is it?
1943 it was built. We've had it since 1950.
So it must have done some work over those years.
Lot of work, yes.
And how long have you been carrying on the process of thrashing?
I've been thrashing myself since 1936. I started with father. The family been in the business since before 1885, someone before then.
So initially when you started the process you probably started with steam, but do you thrash with steam nowadays?
No, only with diesel tractor. We started with the steam engine we were using on this machine now.
So is the steam engine owned by you as well?
It's owned by me now, yes. It was father's, now it's mine.
The next process after the thrashing is the baling. We've got Fred Cutler here from Hampshire to tell us one or two things about it. What actually happens in the process of baling?
Well, the straw from the threshing machine is normally fed straight into the baler, but on the rallies and these type of occasions we feed the straw in by hand to show the people at the rally how it was done in the early days. And the baler collects the straw at the top. It's brought down by a series of rakers to the jockey. The jockey then pushes it down into the bell chamber, and the ram comes up, which is about 200 to 210 times per minute, to push the straw up into bales. But when you're tying these bales, if you're being fed rather strongly, it is a very nerve-wracking experience. And you can, if you're not careful, get the needle jammed under the jockey and bend it, or you can get the strings all bent up and twisted and tie the bells together. But if you can get the baler being fed steadily, normally, you can generally turn out a very good bale.
Is it dangerous, from what you were saying there about getting things stuck? Is that dangerous to you?
If you're not quite sure what you're doing, yes, it can be dangerous. A friend of mine, working over on another set across the field, he has already had 2 smacks in the head from the needle being caught by the jockey.
And the bales themselves, are they a set size, or can you adjust the machine to make larger or smaller bales?
No, you can adjust the machine to make larger or smaller bales. These machines in the early days used to tie the bales with wire. But now, in later years, people made string attachments to put on, whereby you can tie the bells by string. And there is no set way of lengthening or shortening the bell with a string tying baler. You have to watch it carefully and judge it.
This looks quite a clean machine compared with some that we see around the site. Is it reasonably modern then?
No, it's about a 1948 vintage. I bought it up in Suffolk off a farm where they'd done very, very little use. It's a full-size contractor's baler. We took the baler completely apart, shot blasted every part of it, rebuilt it all back up, and now we have a very good and a very efficient machine.
Well, we've seen the system on here. Is it a reasonably similar system baling nowadays?
Oh no, it's far more sophisticated baling nowadays. On the modern pickup balers, they're all self-tying. On this baler, you have to tie each bale by hand.
So it requires man and steam to do the job right here?
Oh yes, yeah, you've got to have the amount of men, whereas you consider that today one man with a pickup baler will go round the field and leave the bales all stacked in a nice little heap to be picked up by one man on the tractor, where here you need 2 men pitching, 1 man on the needle and another 1 man stacking the bales.
Hubert Snowden here is a Devonian, and he's very much versed in the craft of thatching. What particular form of thatching is it that you do, Hubert?
This is rick thatching. This is the way we used to thatch the corn ricks and hay ricks before the days of combine harvesters and balers, when we used to cut the corn in sheaves, and then we built into ricks, and they had to be thatched to keep it dry. It was only had to be thatched for the season, so it wasn't put on as thick as you would for a house, and it just had to last the one season. So it's put on like I do here, put on about 2 inches thick, and it's roped on then. We spin ropes with the same thatching straw and make our spars out of hazel sticks, split hazel sticks, and that is pins the thatch right onto the stack, and that would keep it dry until you wanted it through that season. It would be threshed out at some time. The steam engines and threshing machines used to come around with the contractors who owned them, and they would come in about 6 weeks, every 6 weeks through the winter, and you'd thresh out so many ricks, what you wanted the grain for, to feed your cattle or sell the good grain to pay your rent, sort of thing. And also the hay ricks, that's the dried grass that you'd made in about July time, that was put up into ricks, built up loose ricks, no balers then. It was pitched up with forks, and they were thatched in the same way to keep it dry so the material wouldn't spoil. And then we used to cut it out in sections with a big knife as you wanted it to feed your horses and cows in the winter. So you took the thatch off bit by bit and used it away, and that would say keep it dry for the year.
How long have you been doing this yourself then, Hubert?
Well, near enough all my life. I used to come out of the village school, junior school, 7, 8 years old I suppose, and run home to the farm, and mother would say, "Oh, father's up thatching, he wants his tea taken up." So I'd go up in the field with his tea, and then he'd say, "Go on, spin some rope or split some spars or hand me up this." They like to be kept up the ladder, because when you're thatching a rick, you see you're up a ladder, and if you're on your own, you got to run up and down with all the things you want. So a thatcher used to like a boy there to hand up the spars and the thatch and the cider if he wanted or whatever. And so by the time you left school, you knew the work. You brought right up to it.
Okay, this is Dick here, practicing yet another old-fashioned rural craft. What exactly is it we're doing here, Dick?
Well, I'm showing the old method of building in the old way with the material that we're actually standing on here today, chalk. That is the main material I use, and the other ingredients that you mustn't forget is the cow muck, and then sand, and that's all I use to do the whole job of building my house. It's so easy, you know, but it's hard work.
The cow muck is an essential ingredient then, is it?
Oh yeah, the cow muck is, gives it that bit of, well, what we call in the trade, makes it fat, and it really sticks, you know. Because, you know, if you get it on your car, it sticks on it, so you get it in there, it sticks.
It can't be that pleasant, though, working with it, surely?
Well, it's no different than a dairyman milking a cow, is it? Having you splashed over you, really, you know. But, I mean, where there's muck, there's money, so it's all right, isn't it?
I suppose so. And what's the basis of the building before you put the plaster on, then?
Well, just chalk, done in shuttering, and with a layer of chalk wet with water, and then a layer of straw, and you must tread it with your feet. And the art is treading it. The more you tread it, the firmer it gets. And that's all, that's the whole, you know, process, really.
How long ago would this art have been practiced widely?
Oh, 600-700 years longer than that, I expect. It's you know, it's real early form of building.
And how long could you expect a building to last that had been built in this fashion?
700, 800 years, 900 years, you know, so the basics of the material used in Salisbury Cathedral would be chalk and grit sand, and that's still standing.
So there's still quite a few buildings around that are built in this method?
Oh yeah, I should think, you know, in this area there's a terrific lot of old buildings built with this same method, yeah.
When they're built like this, is there any kind of maintenance that's required on them to keep them up to scratch then?
Well, the only thing is, they used to say you have a good pair of boots on it when you start and a good hat on it when you finish, and that's the secret, you know. You must keep the wet out, really, and that's it.
Half-size engines are by no means toys. They're really just a scaled-down version of the full-size engine in every detail. There were a couple of gentlemen actually with this half-size engine, but they've left Wendy to go through the task of the interview. Wendy, did you have anything to do with the building of this engine?
No, it was professionally built by South Dorset Engineering, Weymouth. They had 5 sets of castings done, but this was the only one they completed before they went into liquidation or whatever. The others are now finished. We've seen several of them about, but they've been finished by different people.
So such as this can actually be purchased in a finished condition then?
That's right, yes.
And how much do they cost to buy?
I don't really know, but 5 years ago we paid about 20,000 for it.
So they're a lot more expensive than a motor car then?
Oh, definitely, yes.
And obviously a lot more difficult to maintain, one would have thought.
Yes, there's all sorts of bits and pieces that go wrong on them, you know. I suppose there are on cars, but I don't know, they're a bit more expensive, I think.
Spares are harder to come by.
That's right, yes, and of course you have to have a boiler test every year.
Not exactly the kind of thing that you take down to the shop to do the shopping with either.
Not really, although we've got it taxed for the road, so we could if we wanted to.
What made the family go out and buy something like this then?
Well, Bill's got several models partly made, and we've got a 4.5-inch one at home that we ride round the garden, and this one happened to be coming up for sale, and we understood it was going to America, and we said, well, why should all the good things go to America? So we thought, well, can we afford it? And we said, well, we can't take it with us, so we decided to buy it, and we had a lot of pleasure out of it.
Do you think he's got any plans to buy a full-size version at any time?
No.
You won't let him?
No, it's not that. This is just easier to move around, isn't it? We tow it behind our motor caravan, and I think we get as much pleasure out of this as the full-size ones do out of theirs.
This is a miniature version of a showman's locomotive. Graham Whitwell here is the owner and I believe the maker of it. Graham, are there many of these showman's miniatures around?
Well, this is the only half-size Borough Scenic in country. There was one other built by a firm called Seven Lamb about 15 years ago, and it's now being exported to America. So this is the only one in Britain. This was built as a hobby, you know, because we have 2 full-size steam engines. That's how I got into it. Other people have approached us to build them for them, you know.
So you more or less started off and it snowballed from there?
That's it, yeah. It's just there was a bit of a demand because it's not sort of like a small miniature, is it, you know?
Did it take much building then?
Well, there was a team of us. There was me, my brother-in-law and a couple of my friends, and we built it in space of a year, but we did it as teamwork rather than somebody potting away like for 5 years on their own, you know.
Have you actually had an engineering training then before you took this job on?
No, we only what I sort of did at school and maintaining our full-size engines. That's about it. You know, we're agricultural engineers, but you know, we knew what looked right and what didn't. That's basically how we built it.
Did you find it difficult then?
Well, yeah, it was, but we all had our certain sections to do, and we just took it from there. I mean, what wasn't right got chucked in bin, like, you know, that was it.
So you more or less took it from what you knew from the larger engines and thought, well, we'll do it a little bit smaller this time.
Yeah, that's it. You know, there was quite a few full-size Scenics around us in Yorkshire, and I kept going and having a measure and having a look, you know, and doing it like that, you know.
And what's your main job around the showgrounds here? Is it just taking people around?
No, we just trailer. It's just for family to run behind, you know, and saves it all walking because it's such a big site. But we on a night we generate with rest at showman's engines, you know.
So it does actually generate then, this?
Oh yeah. Last night we were generating from 8 o'clock till 2 o'clock in the morning. We went back to caravan and had another session up there.